Hi, her name is Emma Kay, and she is a first-time author of a soon-to-be-published book, The Terrible Truth About the Truth, the story of a Rwandan Tutsi genocide survivor, when home doesn't feel like home, and when abroad feels far from home. For those who are listening to Emma's story for the first time, I invite you to listen to her previous stories so that you learn about her soon-to-be-published book. Today, Emma will be talking about one of the stories that deeply touched her, hoping that it could also touch you, so that you never, ever take anything for granted.
Coming from Rwanda, in a country where I saw 1 million innocent lives being taken away, I thought I had heard it all and I had seen it all, until I heard this testimony of David Ndayambaje.
David Ndayambaje believes to be born in early 1994, so he was too young to know what happened during the 1994 genocide of Tutsis. And as no one he knows ever claims to be one of his relatives, he disposes of no information concerning his biological family. What's more, he believes to be the sole survivor of his family. As David was told, a military man found him in hundreds of thousands of bodies, and he brought him to Gisimba orphanage. Later on, David was adopted by an old and poor woman out of compassion. After learning that many children were losing their lives in Gisimba orphanage as a result of poor living conditions.
David was considered as a genocide survivor, and his rescuer received money from National Commission for the Fight Against the Genocide, CNRG, as well as Ibuka, meaning Remember, an association of survivors of the genocide of Tutsis. That money helped David's adoptive mother to pay for his school and his health care, among other approved expenses. That sounds like good news, right? Unfortunately, it didn't take very long until David's financial assistance was stopped. Why?
Good question, Emma. Why was David's financial assistance stopped? After all, the Rwandan government had received funds from the United Nations, among many other Western countries and worldwide financial institutions, to help children like David.
Easy to answer. You have to understand that, according to CNRG and Ibuka's leaders, being a baby found in dead bodies wasn't enough for someone to be considered as a genocide survivor. The recipients of that precious fund had another requirement: to look like Tutsis and to continue fulfilling that requirement as long as they were receiving the benefits. How is that not fair? And you can't blame CNRG or Ibuka because David's upbringing had gone a little bit off track. In fact, as David was growing older, you couldn't tell if he was Tutsi or Hutu, as he admitted it himself.
And I quote, "I lived in Rwanda being perceived as a genocide survivor by some and a criminal descendant by others. And when I became a young adult, I took time to think about my miserable life. And these two questions resurfaced in my head. First question, why me? And second question, was I the only child found among 1 million bodies of Tutsis killed during the genocide?"
Those two questions pushed David to initiate a research, hoping to find an answer to his questions, and believe it or not, he found it. In fact, David wasn't surprised when he discovered he wasn't alone. Actually, there were many Rwandan boys and girls in the same boat, and some of them hadn't had the chance to attend school like David just because of their looks. Not knowing whether that was good or bad news, all David was sure about was that something had to be done by someone, and that someone was no one else but him.
David started an association that he called Hope for the Future Family. He wrote letters to the president of Rwanda and to the Rwandan parliament as a voice to hundreds of survived children born between 1991 and 1994 who considered themselves as genocide survivors but were not receiving survivor benefits only because they didn't look like Tutsis. A big accomplishment for sure. Even igihe.com, the pro-government newspaper, recognized that when they called David for an interview. David was excited by seeing his dream finally coming true. However, after what he called a great interview with igihe.com, he was surprised when he read about his interview report by the same newspaper that they entitled The Bitter Testimonies of Young Genocide Survivors. Soon after Igihe's news report, David was arrested, and he spent 3 long months behind bars. And as you can imagine, he was hopeless, and there was nothing he could count on to regain some hope. As David states, his worst life experience continued to haunt him, and he kept wondering why things were happening the way they were. Following his release, he continued to fight for the cause he believed in, but unfortunately, with no avail. One of David's professional advisors strongly recommended that he get a DNA test to prove that he was a Tutsi.
I personally don't know how David's DNA was going to solve the puzzle if no sample of DNA from his family members was kept on file. But anyway, as David said, even if there was a chance for his DNA to solve his own problems, he didn't see how that was going to solve the issues of any of the children he was advocating for.
David continued to fight for his rights and his friends' rights, and that angered the Rwandan authorities, who threatened to put him back to prison. His lawyer advised him to leave the country, and with the help of non-government organizations and friends who lived abroad, David managed to leave the country. Today, David resides outside of Rwanda, but his life is still in danger, following the testimony he delivered while in exile that, in fact, gave birth to this story. The Rwandan authorities, ashamed of their wrongful acts, have been chasing David to eliminate him. I hope that when you hear this touching testimony of David Ndayambaje, you join me and Emma to denounce anyone who unjustly denies assistance to little children in need like David. And if you never faced injustice in your life, remember to never, ever take anything for granted. If you like Emma's sad but true stories, please remember to subscribe to her channel so that you don't miss her next stories. See you next time.